Welcome to the Production Talk podcast with me, Jan of mixartist.com.au. In this podcast series, we celebrate the modern way of producing music. We want to talk about all things related to songwriting, recording at home, and music production. So if you produce your music at home, this is the place to be. Please subscribe and recommend this podcast to all your friends. This is the Production Talk podcast, episode 54. Welcome back to another episode of the Production Talk podcast. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the country that I'm recording this episode on today, the Arakwal people of the Bundjalung Nation. And I would like to express my thanks and gratitude and respect to all elders, past, present, and emerging. In today's episode, I would like to address something that a friend asked me earlier today. The question was, can I hire you for a mix, and can I get the Pro Tools session to then learn how you did it? And you know what? I actually personally don't mind that at all, because, you know, I'm here to share information with everybody, including you, the listener right now. Sharing what I know is at the absolute core of what I do. But the thing is, a lot of the things that you would see may not make sense, because in all honesty, my sessions when I mix are somewhat structured, I guess, but in a very own and unique way. And to somebody else, this would look, I guess, let's say creatively messy, and a lot of the stuff wouldn't make sense. And in addition, of course, I have a large selection of plugins, and there's a very good chance that I'm using heaps that you may not have. So I guess that's not really useful, but then I thought about a better way to just help people understanding what people do and what we do in mixing. So I thought about the episode about Sapphire's song Breakaway that I published a couple of episodes ago. The link will be in the show notes, of course, where I broke down a song basically from the recording stage to the mix. And I'd like to do the same thing again, this time for you, Richard. I know that your preferred genre is not necessarily reggae, but probably more rock. So I picked up a rock song and gave it a shot and started mixing it. And I want to talk you through my thoughts and what's on my mind and my general workflow today. So before we start, let me just explain who I'm going to mix today. So if you Google and search for free multitracks, a lot of different websites pop up, and today I would like to showcase or acknowledge or say thanks to the Cambridge-MT.com website. They have the Mixing Secrets free multitrack download library available with dozens or hundreds, I'm not quite sure, but with many songs that you can download and mix for yourself. So I went through those and picked a song that I felt like was probably down your alley, Richard. It's a rock song, and the song I'm choosing here today is Maybe by a European band Unicorn Rodeo. And yeah, so just before I get started, I just want to clarify that the songs on that website are subject to terms and conditions and fair use. So I'm now on the fair usage or frequently asked question usage webpage, and they state clearly that if you use those songs to make your own portfolio, to promote your own mixing and mastering, that is not permitted. So let me be perfectly clear, this is not what I'm trying to do here. This is not my portfolio. If you want to listen to my portfolio, go to mixartist.com.au/listen. Instead, this is the audio equivalent of a video tutorial that I'm doing here today. And I just would like to go onto the record quickly on the Cambridge-MT.com website under usage conditions. It states that, and I'm quoting, on the basis that such usage is educational, which I believe my podcast is, this should not be a problem. As long as the tutorial is entirely non-for-profit, a little disclaimer, my broadcast doesn't cost a cent for anybody and never will. And I'm not going to charge for this episode in the future. So I believe that this grants me the condition to use the song today. Good. So the song that I'm mixing today is called Maybe by Unicorn Rodeo. and the multi-track is 54 tracks all up. And in most cases, a mix like this it takes about a day. So let's get started. I have a session prepared, and I would like to just show you quickly how everything sounds if dropped into an empty DAW session. I'm just going to hit start from the top, and we'll run the level for you so you get a bit of an idea of the sound, the genre, the vibe of the song. Let's hit it. Okay, let me just pull it here. You probably noticed that this is anything but a finished mix. So let me just share a couple of thoughts. Drums kicking in at the beginning and just like instantly, wow, the drummer has got energy. I need to find that. I need to bring this to the foreground. It's really good. He's playing in a very unique style. He's got his own very unique groove. He plays a lot of notes, and I need to find a space to fit this in. And then the moment the instruments start, the first thing that comes to mind, and I'm sure you agree here, is that the keyboard synthesizers and string synthesizers, they're just killing it. Now they're just dominating everything right away, and I can't hear a thing beyond the keyboards anymore. So what that tells me right now is that the recording engineer gained up signals focusing on peak values mainly, which would explain that the drums now ended up being very quiet and the synthesizers ended up so loud. This is not exactly how I would do it, but that's not a problem. So looking at it from an engineer's perspective, when starting a mix, if I had an analog mixing console, the first thing I would do is now go to the top of the channel and adjust the trim control, which basically balances out these level differences and gets signals into the same ballpark so that I can then later use my faders for the fine adjustment. That's of course one way to do it. If you have a DAW that does that, Harrison Mixbus comes to mind that I used a lot. Most other DAWs such as Logic, such as Pro Tools and so on use something that we know as clip gain. So all this is another possibility to balance out dramatic level differences like this. In my case, I decided to work slightly differently. So I'm now using something that is known as subgroups. And if this is new to you, a subgroup basically means that I take a range of signals, let's say all my drums, and route all of these outputs via a bus to a new destination. And in my case, this now travels via a group track or subgroup track, however you want to call that. So all of the drums are then summed together, travel through one more fader on the way to my mix bus, so that I have a fader that controls the overall drum volume. And then, of course, I have the same thing for the bass and the guitars and so on. And I really like to work onto subgroups because it helps me to balance out the overall level very quickly. In other words, I can quickly adjust the level of all the guitars and of all the synthesizers. So what I'm going to do next is go back to the top, and I will change the view in my DAW so that I don't see the 53 channels anymore. 54, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. 54 if I'm not mistaken. And I'm going to show only the subgroup channels, which means instead of 54 channels, I now have one channel for all the drums. I have another channel for the bass and all its effect, which in some ways, people could argue this is a bit of a waste. It's not enough signals to justify subgroup, but I personally like it. So please let me get away with that. And then, of course, we have the guitars, of which we have plenty. They all go into their own group. Then I have another group for the synthesizers and all keyboard signals, and then another one for the vocals. So if we have a quick look in front of me, I can now see drum group, bass group, guitar group, synthesizer group, vocal group, as well as my mix bus master fader, and that's it. So that allows me to very quickly adjust the overall level. So let's go to the top again, and I now play back and adjust a rough mix as we go. Okay, so I made a mistake here. I just realized I routed my vocals into the wrong bus. Let me quickly have a do-over over there, please. Sorry about that. I just rewind a couple of bars and go back in. Okay, and I just found another signal inside the vocal group that caused trouble. So inside the vocal group is a synthesized male and female voice, and I now need to make a decision whether I leave this in the group. I just had to pull it because it was just way too loud for my liking. But this signal, I'm just hitting solo. Sound-wise, this is meant to be a vocal. However, to me, it has a very synthesized sound, and I'm very much considering to move this across into my keyboard group because I think it might be better off being there. All right, but yeah, now that I've got the rough mix sorted, let me just go back to the top, and I would like to work on the drums. So there are a few things that I would like to share with you now about the sound of the drums. So I'm just going to solo the subgroup for the drums, and let's have a listen from the top. Good. Let me just share a couple of thoughts with you straight away. Look, first and foremost, these are really well played drums, and they're also rather well recorded. So I don't always end up mixing recordings that are so clean and so free of mistakes. However, there are still a few things that come to my mind that need adjusting. So the first thing is that the balance between kick and snare, the energy, is not there yet. That's my job in the mixing stage. They don't need to be super loud to be powerful. They need to be energetic. They need to carry the song forward. And right now they sound a little bit on the fluffy side for my personal liking. And the other thing is that the hi-hat is too close. So the hi-hat sounds like it's really close, like my ear is right next to it. And that's in general not a problem. I can definitely deal with this, but those are the first things that come to my mind. So based on this, I'm now going to open up my drum group so that I now have all the drum signals right in front of me. Drum group, selected, open, there it is. And I'll do the same thing again, and I'm going to start balancing the signals within the drum group. And I'm probably going to play with kick and snare and definitely will attend to the hi-hat. Let's do that again from the top. Okay, so I'm now soloing the overheads, and I'm actually just looking for the hi-hat microphone. Nope, that's a right microphone. Interestingly, it says hat and right. And let's go back to the top where the the hi-hat is actually played. So this is now the overhead channel. And I can hear that the hi-hats come through the overhead really loud and very close. So that's interesting because that doesn't sound to me like hi-hats would usually sound with standard overhead technique. I'm not entirely sure what went on there. One possibility is that they might have had an extra hi-hat microphone, which they blended into the stereo overhead channel in the recording path. That's a possibility. Or it could also be the way they aimed the microphone. So keeping the hi-hat in check is maybe a little bit of a problem for me because I probably want the overheads louder, but the hi-hats quieter. That's not necessarily something that I can do. Let me just think about this for a moment and see what else I can do. This is interesting. That's the room sound. I like that. Okay, good. So I'm starting to like it a little bit better. Let's now investigate the next group. So from the drums, let's move on to my next group, which is the bass group. Okay, so now it depends on your playback system. If you listen on a mobile phone, chances are you couldn't hear much at all. It probably would have been a little bit quiet anyway. But I have two signals to work with. I have what is called the bass dark, and I need to bring this right up so you can hear it, and then a bass thin. So let's go through them one by one. Here's the bass dark. Nice. Everybody loves a nice chunky bass. Let's check the bass thin. Okay, so this now has a lot more grit or definition, as I would call it, string sound. And now I turn both on, and I'm now going to move the faders against one another. So one up, the other one down, and vice versa to see how they behave when I start blending them. What I'm listening out for now is any comb filtering effects. Okay, so the good news is nothing negative popped up in my mind here, which is really good. So comb filtering, if this doesn't mean anything to you yet, you probably heard about the phrase phase or phasing, dealing with phase in mixing or recording. Phase is pretty much impossible to hear by itself. So if I just played, let's say, a snare drum in solo and played with a phase button, or polarity as it should be called, in all honesty, I wouldn't be able to hear the difference. However, if it rubs against something else, if there was another microphone and then you play with the distance of the microphone, which alternates the phase angle, or the polarity button, then negative sound effects may be audible. And that's what I was just listening out for. They manifest themselves as what we know as comb filtering. So none of this was audible to me, so that's a good thing. So let's throw it together, drum group and bass group. Let's see how they balance against one another. I'll just fast forward to a place where the bass player plays a bit more. Okay, that sounds pretty good already. So when I make decisions on how much of the dark bass signal I want and how much of the thin signal I want, I really listen to what the bass player plays and how the performance was laid down and what the bass player is trying to achieve here. And what I hear is that the bass player is actually playing melodic elements. It's not just carrying the song quietly in the background without being noticed. The bass player is actually playing some interesting notes that I want to hear in the mix. And for that, I definitely need the definition that I get from the thinner signal, which is now just a touch louder than the bassier signal. Good. Okay. This is drums and bass. Let me move on and add the guitars. So for now, I'm just soloing the guitars, and I have a total of, I'm not even sure how much this is, but I think this is probably about a dozen guitar channels or something. Let's listen in solo. Here come the guitars. Some clean guitars at the top here. Some nice picking. A lovely melody on top. That melody is important to me. I memorized this. Let me just fast forward into the next section. So there are definitely some distorted guitars coming up soon. Okay, good. Those guitars need to be really powerful and chunky, so it is worth investigating a little bit more. So I'm now going through the guitars one by one. Here's a single microphone that I received as guitar number 3. Nice. Let's check the next one. Okay, so this goes along. So what we have is 2 signals that both belong to the same take. So here's the close microphone. And here is a microphone at a greater distance. And that's how they sound together. Let me just start playing with the levels. So I just pushed the room up a bit too far. And that's when they just stop playing. So let me just dive in there one more time. Makes the guitar sound very roomy and distant. And I bring the other one up. Now this is the close microphone, brings it right into my face. And I'm now looking for a nice balance. I want to hear a bit of that room, not too much. I want the guitars to be chunky and in my face, but at the same time, it needs a little bit of that space. And if I can get a nice sounding room microphone, I definitely prefer that over any reverb plugins that I might have on my computer. Let's go on to the next guitar, which is labeled Guitar 4. And that is on my right hand side, and the same thing, I have a guitar that is coming, that sounds like it's close to the cabinet. And in addition, next one I believe is a room. So same thing again, I've got the close microphone here, the room microphone there, can blend between the two. And there's a nice definition there, the upper mids, the clarity, the stringy, slightly aggressive sound that we really want from distorted guitars. The next one over here, this comes down the center. Again, this is a close microphone, however the guitar take sounds more like a lead guitar to me. That's why I also panned it into the center, and again that comes with a room microphone. And this was the close microphone. So I have quite a few signals to play with. So that is now 3 different takes of distorted guitars with 2 microphones each. And then for the clean guitars, let me just go through this one more time. The clean guitars over here, there's all of them together. Are also 2 takes. Here's the first one. Which also comes with its own room microphone. And that's them together. And here's the other take. And the other take's room microphone. So that means I have 2 cleaner sounding guitars, each one with a room microphone, and 3 distorted guitars, each one with a room microphone as well. Then it keeps on going. There's even more. So later down in the middle of the song, there is another guitar. Let's just dive into this. I'm playing both room and direct microphone of guitar 6. And there's yet another one further at the end, in the last third. A solo. Look, the moment I hear a solo like this, the first thing that comes to my mind is, wow, I need to find a really nice space in the mix for that lead solo that needs to be in the foreground. I can already see visually that the singer has a break there, so that's great. From an arrangement point of view, well done, Unicorn Rodeo. You left some space for one another. That's how a good song should be. So the singer has a break and the lead guitar player gets some space. So that means I'm going to bring that signal up a touch. I will probably add just a pinch too much effect. I love my delays and a bit of reverb on guitar solos, of course. And then there's even more guitars. There's an effect channel. Let me just see what I find there. Oh, cool. Okay, that's going to be a nice effect that I want to place into the background somewhere. Okay, so let's put all of this together. I've got my drum group, my guitar group, and my bass group. Now all playing together from the top. Oh yeah, so I'm starting to have some fun here. It's all coming together, so that's really good. What I usually look out for in the early stages of a mix is, signals that cause trouble. And so far I haven't found a single one, so that's really good. The hi-hat needs a bit of attention. I need to keep this in the back of my mind and find good solutions here. But that's not what I would call a real problem. So problems could be vocals that are completely out of tune, distortion, excessive noise, audible clicks and edits from bad editing, things like this. Those are roadblocks in my mixing, and so far none over here. So well done, Unicorn Rodeo. And I don't know who the engineer was, so if anybody knows, please let me know. I'll put it in the show notes because I love giving credit to people who deserve it. Next step, let's go into the synthesizers and let's see what we've got going on there. Okay, yeah, look, let me just try to make some sense out of this. So when it comes to the keyboards, I can hear what you're trying to achieve here. The sound of the keyboard is a little bit 80s for my personal liking. The rest of the production doesn't really give me that 80s feel, so there's a little bit of a mismatch for my personal liking, and I would have preferred to have less MIDI sounding strings here, but let's see what we can do. So here is the first one in solo now. This is a cello. Bring this up a touch. That's not that bad. That actually sounds really nice by itself. It was a bit buried in the mix between the others, among the others. So maybe this is something that I could feature as one of the signals that drive the synth group a little bit. The next track is labeled Strings. Let's find out what this is. Yeah. Ooh, okay, yeah, I guess this is what bugged me there. That doesn't really sound like strings to me. Okay, I wish we had the MIDI notes now and we could then go in and find some better sounding strings. But of course, that's not possible. So my job is to make do with what I have and do the very best possible. And of course, I will try to do that. That's better. This is called the high synthesizer. And then there's a drown as well. Oh, let me bring this up a touch. Okay, texture. I like that one. That is really interesting. It sounds drowsy to me. It is slightly pitchy, but in a good way. It sounds a little bit outlandish. All of those things are things I can definitely deal with. So the first thing that comes to my mind is there's one signal that I don't like that much at all. And that was the string synthesizer. Here it is one more time, and I will... That one. It also sounds distorted to me. So I'm going to use it, of course, because it was supplied, and every note that I receive from a client ends up in the mix. That's just my policy. However, I will have to keep this a bit quieter and try to not give this too much dominance in the mix. So let me just see if I can come up with a nice balance of the synthesizers. Let's get into it. So here's the cello. That sounds nice. And let's keep that bad sounding string a little bit quieter. Let's bring up the high a touch more. Nice. And the drone. Let's see how we can push this. Oh, that's way too much. But about here. I even want to touch my cello here. Okay, so that's good. That's good. This is a starting point. That's definitely not the finished mix yet, but let's see how this interacts with the drums, bass, guitars, and synthesizers. So I'm turning on all of them together and find a little balance between those four groups. Yeah, I think this is all starting to make sense now. Good, and of course, now let's focus on the absolute most important signal of all. That's, of course, the vocal. So let's get straight into that, and let me introduce you to the main singer.
Maybe if I just keep on trying, I can't figure out what my life's supposed to be like, what it's all about. Maybe you are pleased for me that I'm finally sure what I wanna get rid of, and what if I want more? Maybe you know.
Oh, and that's when some additional vocals kicked in here really loud. But let me just talk about the main vocal first. The most important thing for me is, can I connect to the vocal performance? Is there something that speaks to me? And well done. I don't know your name, but respect, you nailed this take. There's a lot of emotion in there. I can hear a story emerging. I can hear what you mean when you sing. So that's really good. Also, pitch-wise, I've had some really difficult, challenging singers. None of that here. Looking at the genre, it's not uncommon to add a pinch, just a tiny little bit of pitch correction. Whether I want to do this or not, I don't feel it needs much, and if it does, maybe just a tiny little bit to satisfy the need for, the typical sound for the genre, but not because the performance really needs it, I reckon. So it sounds clean. The microphone is definitely suitable for your voice, and it's well recorded, so no problems here. I can also say that this is probably coming from a microphone through a preamp straight to the recorder. There's a fair bit of dynamic left, so I don't think this vocal has been compressed on the way in. This is something that I pretty much do every single time I record vocals personally. I love to commit to my compressors, but I absolutely respect if people don't feel confident to do so or just want to keep the options open. That's perfectly fine. Of course, I can do this in the mix. No problem at all. So it's better to play it safe than to mess it up. However, if you're confident, go for it, I would say. And then just now, where I stopped playback, something else kicked in. So there are some backing vocals, ad-libs and so on, but I also heard some more synthy-sounding voices, so I would like to go through them one by one and figure out what's what. So the first channel is called Backings. There's this.
Maybe you know.
Oh, lovely, lovely. So I can hear more than one voice here, and that sounds like the same singer to me. Also singing backgrounds, and they come through nice and stereo. That's a signal that's going to mix itself. Love it.
Express myself.
And this is what we call the ad-libs.
Maybe you know.
Okay.
Maybe.
So these vocal lines go together with the other vocal signals, of course. So if we put them all together, here's 3 different versions.
Maybe you know.
Yeah, you go, girl. That's awesome. I love it already. I can't wait to really get into mixing this. This is fantastic. All coming out of the same singer. Well done.
Maybe.
I love it. Okay, good. So that's a lot of fun. That's a lot of fun, of course. This said, of course, having many takes of the same vocal means they are a little bit trickier to mix because they all sound the same. And my job will be to sort of separate them from each other a little bit. If you have different singers, and that naturally is a little bit easier because they sound like different singers, of course. In this case, it's all the same person, which means I need to just carefully make sure that I cue it right and, that each voice finds its own place and separates from the others. That's my problem, and I'm happy to take this on. Then there's another signal called Synth Vocals Male. Let's have a listen to that. Yep, again, this sounds like it's coming from a can. This is definitely a synthesizer. Maybe even the same keyboard that we had for the keyboards. Not sure. And then there's the female one that I actually played at the beginning. Okay, good. They sound like synth to me more than vocals in context, but I think I'm going to leave them in the vocal group for now, just so that we don't need to start everything from the beginning again. So let's just listen to everything that we've got so far and how to put it together.
What I wanna get rid of, and what if I want more? Maybe you know. I found a way. Express my dear.
Okay, let me just fast forward a little. Oh yeah. So I think this is one of the highlight moments of the song that's in the back of my mind again. This moment I'm gonna mix with a bit of extra attention to make sure the song really peaks there. So let me just zoom into the main vocal one more time. I thought I just heard a pinch of distortion just now in the voice. Let me just zoom in and investigate.
Maybe you know that I finally found a way to.
There's a pinch, just a tiny pinch of distortion on that loud, long note in the middle. That's something that I can deal with. That's not the biggest problem, but it's really important for me to be aware of those things, of course. That's all good.
Maybe you know.
Okay, good. All right. So basically, let me just sum up where we're at this point. So I've gone through all the signals, I've arranged them, I organized them for myself, I balanced them against one another, and this is what I would call the rough mix. If I was to mix the song by myself, this is something that I would probably knock out in 5 to 10 minutes max. I try to be as quick as I can with these things so that I don't wear myself out worrying too much over details that are actually not that important at this stage. So I try to work really fast when I do these things. And that's when the song takes a first direction. And at the end of the rough mix, everything sits in the general pocket. It's not really perfectly balanced yet, but I can hear everything. Nothing is jumping out of the mix. So everything is sort of there. And that's a good place to get started. So the next step, the next phase that I'm now entering is processing, to look into what polish, what tone do I need to give the signals to push the song into the right direction. And we could keep it really minimalistic and leave it as authentic as possible, which is a good thing to do for some genres, and mix it in a very raw, organic way. But I think I'd like to paint this song a little bit more modern, a little bit more polished, a little bit more punchy, a bit more radio ready. While if we, kept the processing to the minimum, we would, get more of an authentic, let's say, 70s vibe, which is also something really beautiful. But in this case, I'm just feeling something that I want to be a bit more, more modern, more in your face, a bit more polished and snappy. So let me just play back one more time so you get an idea of how it sounds, and then I'm going to open up a different mix session where a larger proportion of the processing was already completed, so you can hopefully hear the contrast. So this is the mix, a rough mix completed. Well, completed, that's the wrong word. The rough mix is done. No processors, not a single plugin in the mix yet.
Trying, I can't figure out what my life's supposed to be like, what it's all about. Maybe you are pleased for me that I'm finally...
Okay, let me just stop right here, and I'm now closing down the session. So we're now going into the mix at a relatively late stage of the mix. So I'm just going to turn off my automation for now, and I'm just going to turn off some of the effect processors. But this is how it sounds. Let me say about probably an hour and a half to 2 hours, maybe 3 hours into the mix. Okay, so let me just talk you through and explain a few things that were going on here. So just to be perfectly clear, this is a mix that I would call about 95-ish% finished. There's still a couple of things that came to my mind and that I need to address. But let me just talk about my vision for the song. So I gave the drums a more punchier, in-your-face, snappier sound, and used a couple of tricks there. A cue, mainly compression, of course. A big element to snappy modern sound is setting the attack and release time right for the genre. But there's also noise gates going on. Noise gates close down or turn the sound off when the toms and kicks and snares are not played. So let me just solo the drums and show you how they sound by themselves. Just as I listened, I also noticed that I can hear the compressor on the snare doing a little bit too much for my personal liking, so I might need to wind this back just a touch. But okay, just for now, let me just show you how the drums sound by themselves. Here's the drum bass again with processors on. Okay, let me just talk you through what I'm doing here. So on the kick and the snare, I basically have a compressor and an expander or noise gate and an EQ on there. And if I just open this up to have a look what's going on there, there's a bit of leveling going on. And when it comes to compression, I think I have about 2-3 dBs of gain reduction on each. It's actually not particularly much. So in my opinion, I often get a better sounding compression effect from less gain reduction. So yeah, a tip on compressors: the more they work, the smaller the sound gets. This sounds counterintuitive, but trust me on this. It gets smaller, tinier, and squashier and wimpier in my personal observation. So too much compression can really kill a powerful drum sound. But if I just have a quick look on the kick, for example, I'm compressing the kick with a 1.5 ratio and 25 millisecond attack. But look, those numbers, take them with a punch of salt. 25 on this compressor might be something completely different than 25 on the next. But there's about 3 dBs of gain reduction on this kick. There's a second kick, the attack one, which has a noise gate on, a soft expander actually. Now it's got a bit of a push in the top end, and then again a 1.5 ratio compression. Then on the snare, I just pulled out some of the lows, gave it a little bit of low end in the low mids. In the low mids. And then a fair bit at the 4 kilohertz range, which gives it a lot of definition. Then, snare down is not important. It's mixed pretty quietly. However, the toms got a little bit of work. So there's definitely some noise gates going on. And they got a bit of a scoop in the lower mids, where the honkier sounding resonances sit. That's about it on the drums. Is there anything else? Did I miss anything fancy I did? Let me just go to the overheads. I actually pulled the high spec just ever so slightly, about 2 dBs in this case. There's a touch of compression again. It looks like I was not very creative here. I used 1.5 compression ratio again. So none of this is really strong. However, then across the drum group, there's yet another compressor. So, in other words, there's one compressor that works on each kick hit or snare hit individually, only seeing that one signal and not reacting to what the other drums play. And once they go through my faders and travel into the subgroup, then there's another compressor waiting for them, which in this case, gets another bit of a second, compressor working on top of it. So that allows me to get away with less gain reduction and less action on each compressor, if that makes sense. And to my ears, that sounds cleaner, more transparent, snappier. Let's have a look what I did to the bass. So here's the bass. Let me just fast forward to where the bass actually started. That's about over here. Oh, some chorus, of course. That's a standard effect on the bass. So when it comes to chorus, or almost all the time, if I have a darker and a brighter bass, I will feed the chorus of the thinner or brighter sounding bass and not of the darker sounding one. Just because if the chorus sits too far in the low end, it can get a little bit wobbly in the bass range. I prefer the chorusy sound in the upper mid. So let me just play a faster section of the bass guitar. It's got a fair bit of metallic sound in there. And when I hear it in solo, it almost sounds too stringy, too metallic. But I guess there was a reason. So once we put this together with the drums and the guitars, that's what it really needs to cut through. So let's listen to that together. Let's throw some guitars at it. Okay, so let me talk you through the guitars, what happened there. On the guitars, let me just go to this one over here. There was a touch of brightness, just about a dB. That's about it in the real top end, and a cut filter at the bottom to pull out all the lows below, what was that, 45 hertz. So really just the frequencies that are pretty much not audible. And again, is touch of compression. In this case, I used a 1.7 ratio and a fairly long attack and release time. No, actually the attack is a bit longer and the release is a little bit on the shorter-ish side. Shorter release times allow the compressor to act faster from note to note and stabilize notes against one another. And I use the same trick again. All of the guitars together travel through the subgroup where I get where I hit them again with a compressor for a second time for the reason that I don't want to process too much on each, just a little bit. So on the guitar subgroup, I've got a brighter sounding compressor, one of the clean sounding that sounds really open and adds clarity to my understanding. There is a touch of brightness, about 3.7 dBs at 6 kilohertz, and that's about it. Just a little scoop in the lower mids just to provide clarity. So very subtle EQ all up. Good. Let's go into the synthesizers. So let's open this up as well and add those into the mix. So we go back to the top and start just before the synthy start. Here they are. Subtle, just the texture. Here's the vocal.
What it's all about. Maybe you are pleased for me.
Okay, so when I stop the vocals, it's might be audible for you. You can hear the effect tail. So on the vocal, of course, I added some reverb. This is standard, and again, it's not rocket science. It's just a standard reverb plugin that I added via send and return routing. And I guess the key parameters for me is, the algorithm. So which imaginary room do I place the singer in, which in my case is a hall. I used a pre-delay of about 25 seconds, and then I changed the reverb time to about just under 2 seconds, 1.8 in this case. However, I sometimes play with the pre-delay, and I often like to do this throughout the song, so it's not unheard of that I have 2 reverbs for vocal with identical settings except for pre-delay, like a smaller pre-delay in the verse and a slightly excessive one for the chorus. That can be done with automation, of course, as well. Good. So what else is happening on the vocal? Let me just find my processors over here just to talk you through how I treated them. 38, there it is. So I've got a ratio on the compressor, 2.6, so I'm hitting it slightly harder. But the compressor doesn't do much gain reduction. It's again about 2 dBs. And I gave the singer a little bit of support in the lower mids because now she's got a thinner voice, female voice, and what that needed in the mix to compete against the guitars was a bit of the warmth, the bottom end. So it's in the 300 hertz range where I added a couple of dBs, and that's pretty much all that was done on the vocal. And of course then, that's all good. That's done already. And then all the vocals, including their reverb, travel yet again through a subgroup where they get treated by a touch more compression. Let me just see how hard I was hitting it there. Oh, the compressor's off, the EQ is off, nothing is on there. So there's a touch of drive with a Neve bus simulation, just a pinch, not much, barely audible. So that's the vocal. That's pretty much it. And then I also should probably talk about the processing across my master bus. I know this is a hot topic. Some people preach never to do that. Who cares if it sounds better, is my take on this. So across the master, I have an equalizer that actually opens up the top end, and I think that's actually relatively significant. Let me just play with the EQ on-off in playback. No, that's not what I wanted to play. Let me play everything. This is currently EQ on. And now off. On. Off. On. Okay, so I hope you can hear that this EQ actually solves a lot of problems for me. And if I remember correctly, I actually did this particular setting really early on in the processing stage. So I open up the top end of the mix with a master EQ, which basically then adds top end to everything. Whenever I do that, I'm very careful. I test the waters, I push it a little bit, but the moment one of the signals starts to misbehave, I usually stop there and wind it back a little. And, if other signals want more, I go elsewhere and do some more work there. But in this case, that EQ actually achieves quite a lot of clarity here. Okay, so once I get out of the processing stage, that's when the cake is done, and now we put the icing on. So if you just cook a cake and that's it, and you serve it, look, you won't get applause for this. It's the icing on the top, the cream on top, the cherry on top, the colorful things that really draw attention and that people want. And with regards to mixing, this is for me the core part of what I like to do in mixing. This is when I start to balance things really delicately against one another. And one example that I would like to point out are the clean guitars in the intro, where two guitars, two different things. And at first, they were not necessarily all audible. Some of these details needed to be balanced against one another to come out into the foreground. Let me just show you what I mean. So here are these two guitars. Okay, so what's going on there? Effectively, there's lots of beautiful notes played, and I'm going to edit a section back in from earlier where I played the first rough mix with the same section, and there's a very good chance that many of the notes you just heard aren't audible. So let me edit this in right now. Okay, and back to the current state of the mix. So let me just play the entire mix again, and let's see if you can hear those notes now. So So, okay, that made a big difference to my ears. I hope you could relate to this. There was definitely a lot going on, and in my opinion, it's coming through much better. And the way I solve this is by literally switching the mixer into automation mode. And then I just put my finger on the fader and close my eyes and play the faders against each other so that each guitar comes through nicely. So that's what I call the icing on the cake. Now I go through the mix and give the vocals a fader ride. And I literally go through it with my eyes closed and ride the fader and ask myself, okay, is this vocal really doing what it's meant to do? Could it be any better? Is there a note that I don't like that much? Then I just pull it just ever so slightly in volume. Or is there a note that I find particularly sweet? Then I just bring it up a little bit louder. And when I'm done with that, it sort of stabilizes the entire vocal through the entire song, and it sounds more, it's in the pocket. By doing these automation fader rides, I also know that I will get away with less compression, and that always sounds more transparent to me. Okay, so I think we are pretty much there. Let me just check if I have a finished version of this mix somewhere that I could play to you now. Quick look over here, close that folder.
I just keep on trying, I can't figure out what my life's supposed to be like, what it's all about. Maybe you are pleased for me that I'm finally sure what I wanna get rid of, and what if I want more?
Okay, let me just pull this for now. So this was almost the entire song. And I think, now I'm about, what is this? About 4 or 5 hours into the mix. And this is probably at a stage where it pretty soon needs some feedback from the artist. I still have a few things on my mind that I could do. But at this stage, I think it's really important to know what the musicians think, and hopefully I'm heading into the right direction. That's not always the case. I've definitely had some feedback where they said, no, it's too old school, make it more modern, or it's too modern, make it more old school. That can happen. And I definitely don't want to be days into a mix and then find out that I'm on the wrong track here. But just to share some thoughts from my end, I know it's a crowd pleaser. The vocals sits high up in the mix. It's probably about in the right ballpark, but maybe just slightly too high. But besides this, I really like the drums, the kick and the snare cut through the busy guitars the way I want it. The bass has enough growl. It really supports the guitars from underneath. The guitars get small when they're and clean and delicate when the clean guitars play, and they get really big and chunky when the distorted guitars come in. The synthesizers play a minor role, as you could hear in this mix, so I kept them in there. If you take them out, you miss them. But when I add them back in, they're not necessarily jumping in front of the mix. That's because I shared my thoughts about these synthesizers with you earlier. To me, that's not the part of the mix that I really wanted to highlight. But then, of course, the main vocalist got a lot of love and is constantly kept in the foreground. And the guitar solo was nice and wet and had a bit of, lovely effect on it. So, and it's nicely balanced, and I always try to achieve the best sound I can with the minimum amount of processing, and that means that I often also steer back. So I throw plugins across, and rather than adding more and more and more, I sometimes just go through it and say, wait a moment, slow down for a second, which ones can I remove? And then I just go through it and just weed it out and get away with the absolute bare minimum. So just scrolling sideways on my mixer, most channels have one plugin. That's pretty much all of them, except for 1 or 2 channels have one plugin. Maybe a third has 2 plugins. And I can see there's the vocal that has 1, 2, 3 plugins. And the bass got a couple more as well. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 on the other signal as well. That's it. So 3 plugins is the maximum that I have on a channel. Most of them have only 1, or about a third has 2 plugins. So less is better if it's used just the right way. So it doesn't get better by adding 8 plugins is what I'm trying to say here. Good. Okay, so again, this is definitely not a finished mix. Definitely a few things that I would want to receive feedback on, but obviously today is not a real mixing session. It's just me taking the song, maybe from the band Unicorn Rodeo of the free multitrack website, and talking you through my thoughts when mixing. So I hope that you got some out of it, something for yourself. Hopefully that helps you to understand how mixing is done. I also hope that in some ways when you record yourself, that knowing what mix engineers think and how they think might even help you to make good decisions there. If you have any questions about any of that, please reach out to me. My website, of course, is mixartist.com.au, where you can connect with me and talk about your projects. And if you want to talk about this episode and discuss this podcast, then of course you can do so on Facebook in the Production Talk Podcast Community Facebook page. All right. I hope you enjoyed yourself. A big thumbs up for the band Unicorn Rodeo. Love you guys. Keep rocking. I'm going to put the link to their website into the show notes, so please visit their website, buy their records. If you see them play live, please go to their shows, support the local music scene. And just another thought before I finish up this episode. If you enjoyed this mixing special today, why don't you reach out to me and maybe talk about featuring one of your songs as a mixing special on the Production Talk podcast one day? Think about it. Reach out to me. Could be fun. And that's all for today. You all have a great week. I shall speak to you again next week. Bye for now.